CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. Thanks so much for being here. I'm your host, Rob Shaw from CHEK News, and we're going to bring you half an hour of excellent political content. Here's a really busy time in BC politics. Lots going on, some major reports on the money laundering issue, and some new polls on the Premier and the museum's popularity or lack thereof that we are going to dive into. We've got a reconfigured panel this week, so I want to go through and introduce everyone. First, the regular members of our pod squad. We have Jillian Oliver, BC Green Strategist Extraordinaire. Hello, Jillian. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Rob. Great to be back.
We have Jeff Ferrier, Vice President of Hill and Knowlton, joining us as he does every week. Hey, Jeff.
Howdy.
We have Mo Amir, the man who needs no introduction, host of This is VANCOLOUR on CHEK. If you're watching us on CHEK, he's coming up next. So you're going to get a double dose of Mo. Mo, thank you for being here. It's great to have you.
Rob, it's an honor. I feel like I'm striking things off my bucket list tonight, so thanks so much.
Well, I hope it doesn't disappoint you, but that's a hell of a bucket list you've got going there. Mine is a little bit different, but it's
Get a better bucket list.
It's long, okay? It has a lot of things.
Okay, good. And we also have joining us Barinder Bhullar, who was handling and directing policy in Premier Christy Clark's office. He worked in the war rooms of 3 BC Liberal campaigns. He's also Senior Vice President at Brains Bioceutical Corp. Barinder, big fan. Happy to have you here on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rob. Great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Guys, let's jump right in because there was an enormous report this week by Justice Cullen into money laundering. We've been waiting 3 years. It's 1,800 pages. There's 101 recommendations into how dirty money, billions of dollars over years, flowed through BC's casinos. There's 2 ways to look at this. I think there's the policy of money laundering, a very important discussion, and the politics of money laundering, which is a sledgehammer very effectively used by the NDP government the last few years on this file. Let's start with the policy. If we want to have a chat about that, Jeff, is this commission report in its length, has it tackled the issue? Is it comprehensive? Is this what we were hoping to get?
I have yet to hear anyone say that the 1,800-page report with 101 recommendations is anything but comprehensive. I think the chief policy finding that it made is that money laundering is real. It's happening in British Columbia, and we need to tackle it. I mean, you think of money launderers. These are the worst kinds of crooks, predators. And the report has told us that billions of dollars, up until recently, been washed in BC casinos, real estate, luxury goods. And let's be clear, this is not a victimless crime, right? This is people doing crimes that destroy people and communities, human trafficking, fraud, and drugs. And you see it in casinos, you see it in horse racing, you see it in real estate, big risks in mortgage brokerage, mortgage lending, loopholes in legal professions and legal, lawyers and accountants being at big risk of this, and a government that up until recently hadn't been doing anything of tremendous substance to put an end to this terrible behavior and take on the criminals. So it's a wake-up call. And as much as I say that the government now is taking steps and to address this, and Justice Cullen flagged this in his report, there's a lot more to do. And the chief policy recommendation is that there needs to be a made in BC approach to money laundering. The federal-led approach is not working. It's ineffective. We need resources in British Columbia. Chief recommendation: anti-money laundering. It's tough to say. As our person in British Columbia to lead the provincial effort to make sure that we keep working at this and address this problem long term, because it's here and it's not going away.
Barinder, sometimes with these reports, they're so long, they're so detailed, they're so complicated, the public kind of zones out a little bit. What do you make of all that?
It is important, Rob, and it's a very important issue. And, Jeff touched on a lot of great points there. And I think this one's different because it wasn't just a report that was brought on to the public. We've been hearing about it for 3 years now, and a lot of folks in the media have done a lot of great work digging up files. There was the public inquiry that was quite public and attentive because it involved political figures. So I think a lot of the public do have a lot of good sense of what was wrong and what was happening on this, and followed this. And I think people should read it. It's taxpayers' dollars that went into this report. Over 100 recommendations, pretty comprehensive. But just reading through the executive summary, there's a lot of agencies and a lot of authorities that need to come together now to solve this problem, to get ahead. So I think definitely there's going to be a lot of attention played to this, and I think people are going to keep their ear close to the ground on this one.
Tons of agencies, as you said, Jillian, including the police, including the feds through various money laundering, tracking and policing resources and prosecutions. How does it all come together, do you think?
Well, I think, what the report outlined, the bottom line is resources for police. They don't have the resources to be able to investigate and to bring cases for prosecution on money laundering. And they're much different than other types of crimes. It requires, accountants, all kinds of people with expertise to be able to gather the evidence to ensure that people are held accountable for this kind of thing. But like Jeff and Barinder said, it's really important that we do find the resources for it, because there's links, Jeff mentioned, to housing. Although the report found that the money laundering is perhaps not driving the market up as much as we might have thought. But to me, one of the most disturbing things is the link to the fentanyl crisis. And, that's a huge issue in the province. It's been really struggling to get a handle on. And I think that looking at how we can try to cut folks fentanyl off at the source and make sure that it's not so profitable could make a huge difference. And it's something worthwhile acting on with a great sense of urgency.
Yeah, the tentacles reach everywhere. And is money laundering an issue people are talking about? And should they be engaging in this? They're worried about all sorts of other things. But how do you think the public should be responding to this?
Well, I think British Columbians had almost a bloodthirst when this commission was announced. And a lot of that was driven by BC NDP rhetoric over the years and folks drawing parallels to the Charbonneau Commission. Obviously, a lot has happened since then. And I think maybe, with the pandemic, there was attention taken away from a lot of the proceedings. But for those of us following it, expectations were slightly dampened by the limited scope of the Cullen Commission. Half the time, half the cost compared to the Charbonneau Commission. And yes, absolutely thorough investigation into casinos, but seemingly limited to just casinos. And this is confusing because the commission demonstrated how unprecedented amounts of dirty money was being washed through BC casinos, which elected officials were aware of. So it's in the realm of possibilities that unprecedented amounts of dirty money were also being washed with other financial instruments, including real estate, especially when the commission acknowledges that real estate in BC is vulnerable to money laundering, with the industry having a very poor record of AML compliance. And yet we have observers, holding up this report and dismissing the role of money laundering in the third most expensive housing market in the world, when the commission itself says that further study would be beneficial since we don't know how much dirty money was being funneled through real estate in BC. So I just hope that this isn't the end of a concerted effort to clamp down on money laundering in this province.
Mo, take off your policy hat, which I assume is shaped like a tricorn or something like that. Put on your politics hat, which is going to be some cool cowboy hat or something. This is a political weapon that has been very effective for the NDP since David Eby in opposition started hammering on this thing. The final report, do you think it was a win for the NDP in the way that it went after the previous Liberal government and the conclusions that it made?
Well, I want to start with the BC Liberals' response first. You have longstanding BC Liberal MLA, of course, former gaming minister Mike DeYoung. I actually think he had a very fair response. I think he was taking some accountability, and he said the words, "We are responsible." I like this approach, both politically and just on a human level. But semantically, those words paint BC Liberal leader Kevin Falcon into a corner, because Falcon is on camera saying that he would apologize if the party was found responsible. And now you have someone literally in his caucus saying, "We are responsible." So, maybe a case of bad semantics, but I think the NDP will pounce on that, and they already have. And then you have, Rich Coleman, he's going on this vindicated victory lap saying that he was doing his best, where as far as I know, I don't think the commission concluded that. That said, in terms of political fallout, after getting hammered the last few weeks over doctor shortages, the museum, heat dome, is this going to reposition the BC NDP as the saviors and the BC Liberals as the villains in this province? I'm not so sure, but nor do I think that the public, outside of BC Liberal partisans, is necessarily going to disassociate money laundering in BC with the BC Liberal brand.
Barinder, the line that's being split here is that the Cullen Commission concluded there was no evidence of corruption, in that politicians didn't benefit financially for their decisions personally in a corrupt manner. But there was a lot of blame on lack of action, inadequate responses from the previous ministers. So how do you think this political debate over the political side of money laundering kind of moves forward now?
Well, I think there was an acknowledgement, as Mo mentioned, from the response from the MLAs that were involved, that, they could have done more. And I think that was the appropriate response. But there was also acknowledgement in the report that there were steps taken by the previous government. And I think it's important to highlight what this report says and what it doesn't. What it does is quite exhaustive. There's comprehensive recommendations coming forward that are vital and important. But it also dispels some of the myths and some of the political accusations out there. There was no evidence of collusion. There was no evidence of corruption. No MLA or ministers were guiding money laundering in this province. And I think that's important to highlight, because that's been in the political realm for a long time. And I think moving forward now, the government needs to take the recommendations and get on with it. And I think even the government response, if they're going to go after political opponents and leaders, they're not going to satisfy the public right now. It's only going to make them angry. And especially if Kevin Falcon's a target, well, Mr. Falcon was not even asked to be a witness in the Cullen Commission, and his name was not even mentioned in the 1,800 pages. So this cannot be played as a political football anymore, and the government needs to get on with the recommendations. Now, the Premier is going to be hosting the Council of Federations. It'll be important to see if this is on the agenda, because of how many authorities and federal agencies are involved on this, and where does this lie in the priority for them?
Jillian, what do you think? Is the politics of this kind of still going? Is it over, or does it keep going, do you think?
Well, I think, a lot of the political damage has been sustained. We're going to talk about the Angus Reid poll that came out in the next segment, but I think that was really telling. You see, even with support for the NDP softening, it's not actually going to the Liberals. So, I think it's the Liberals might be kind of in a place where they've sort of sustained the damage. The NDP went really hard, on mismanagement of ICBC, pretty much everything they could as soon as they assumed government, because they knew that the public was really going to be primed to sort of accept those messages and be able to make those messages stick to the Liberal brand. I think that, I'm sure the government was hoping that it would be more conclusive and more damning, but it's very difficult to prove what extent the government was thinking about political gain, how they were calculating, and the way that the report frames it as could have done more. You could say that about virtually any government file where they're falling short. So I'm not sure that this inflicts more political damage, but I think that the political damage that has already been inflicted is here to stay.
Yeah. Jeff?
Let's get real. I'm finding it kind of
Wait a second.
sad.
What have we been doing this whole time?
Well,
Good.
Jillian
let's get real.
Jillian makes good points, but let's we're talking about the politics here, and I've been watching a lot of the social media coming out of the Liberal land, and I find it kind of sad and desperate that they're doing a victory lap over a report saying they completely and utterly failed to stop money laundering because it says they didn't do anything criminal or corrupt. And David Eby had a clip for the ages when he said BC Liberals shouldn't be satisfied with the commissioner giving them a sash that says, "I'm not corrupt." So I've got the sash here. I'm not corrupt, right? If anyone wants to wear it.
Put it on.
It's not for me.
It goes really well with your hair.
Barinder talks about what's in the report. The word said, those best positioned to put a halt to profligate criminal misuse of the gaming industry between 2008 and 2018 failed to take the necessary action. The problem of illicit cash grew substantially during Christy Clark's tenure as Premier. Cullen's words, not mine. And why did it happen? It was because there was and again, Cullen's words, a significant failure of will manifested by behavior like Clark, learning there was suspicious cash going into BC casinos at an alarming rate, and then not engaging to investigate and stop it. Had time to investigate closing a bridge for yoga. DeYoung had time to dance at a made-up movie awards show. Coleman had time to evict folks from Little Mountain to make way for a vacant lot. But none of them had time to go after money launderers, and that's the scandal. It's not the corruption. It's that BC Liberals had time for their own priorities, but couldn't be bothered to take the fight to the money launderers.
I feel like Katie would be jumping in here to effectively counter that because I think... Anyways, we'll leave that because we want to move on to the next topic. Pretty good, Jeff. But that sash got you riled up.
Here's the
You're
sash.
ready to go.
Here's the
There's
sash.
A fighting sash.
Kevin Falcon, you want this sash? All yours.
Okay, we'll cut his feed now. It's all good. We got the sash clip. Let's move on to the Premier's popularity and or lack thereof, or the museum issue. They all kind of conspire together. Two very interesting polls from Angus Reid this week. One showing the Premier's popularity down 7 points. He's at 48%, around where he was when he first took power in 2017, the lowest point since the pandemic began. And the second poll outlining the eye-wateringly unpopular Royal BC Museum project, and 70% of the public polled there not thinking this is a good idea. What does this tell us? Why don't we start with you, Barinder? What do we make of these numbers and the context that they're in?
I think you're saying, well, the longest honeymoon period for a political party coming to an end. And for a long time, it was a one-issue government, as governments were around the world dealing with the pandemic. And more, we see issues come up. We see that some of the ministers are not capable of handling them and getting in front of them. I get that. And naturally, you're going to see a reflection in the numbers there. And this is also on the museum issue and everything else. This is where, I think caucuses get in trouble, because you're going to have within that caucus room, you're going to have MLAs who have projects throughout their ridings that are not getting funding that's needed, and they see a pet project over in Victoria getting funded that they're not too excited about. And I think that's when you see rifts starting to happen, and that's when you see people questioning ministers, and that's very critical to see how they're going to keep that all caucus in hold there. So definitely those numbers are going to be reflective, and the more and more issues that we see now coming out of the pandemic that have been highlighted here, healthcare, infrastructure side, gas prices going up, the affordability issue, renters rebates. So a lot of promises that have been made that are not being met by this government are going to come back, and that's why I think you see the numbers going down for the Premier.
Mo, what do you make? How much do you think the museum is in play here? And if you're a New Democrat and you're looking at these, are you worried at all, or are you still pretty comfortable with where they stand, do you think?
Unless you're Brad West in Port Coquitlam, I think a 70% approval rating, or whatever Premier Horgan was at his peak, is just unsustainable. That said, 48% is still good, but it's the trend line that's a lot more conserving. And you know what? This government was caught flat-footed on this museum stuff. And I think when you give yourself a retroactive raise and the public doesn't make much of a fuss, I can kind of understand why maybe you got a little too comfortable or a little too complacent. But honestly, I wish that the public was as fired up as they are about this museum when it comes to drug poisoning deaths, the aftermath of the heat dome, doctor shortages, funding for kids with autism. There's a lot to really hammer this government on in their second term. And I think it speaks to the absurdity of politics that the museum has become the issue where Premier Horgan is effectively turning heel. But I think, echoing what Barinder was saying, perhaps this is sort of the gateway to take off some of that COVID leadership shine from Premier Horgan and from the BC NDP cabinet, and maybe start looking a little deeper into some of these other promises and what I would say shortcomings of governance that have really affected British Columbians.
It's a good point, I think, Jillian, that there's so many other things people could be angry about, and yet somehow the $1 billion museum seems to have been somehow embedded in the public's kind of consciousness at the right moment. Is it just kind of the part of where government is now and the cycle that it's in?
Well, I think that it's not the museum in and of itself. It's that I think that this government has really tended to sort of, try to either pass the buck to other levels of government or talk about sort of systemic barriers for why they can't make progress on big files like housing affordability or the drug toxicity. So I think that, when the public sees them putting so much money and so much sort of, political capital behind a big project, a big expensive project like the museum, that sort of makes them look a little bit more culpable for those files if they're seen to be focusing on other things instead, rather than just saying we're trying our best but we're running into roadblocks like they have in the past. With the poll itself, I think what was really interesting to me is that we're almost exactly where we were, really close to where we were in 2017. Horgan's approval ratings when he first became premier in the minority government were at about 48%. The NDP got about 40%. They're looking at about 42% vote intention. But like I said before, what's different is the Liberals are still down 10 points. So that means that, and the Greens are about the same as well as where they were in 2017. So that means that there's a lot of voters out there that are either undecided, looking for a place to go, or simply perhaps not going to turn out, like we saw in Ontario, where we had a turnout below 50%. I think we're seeing a lot of voter fatigue with the lack of progress on files, with so many cost of living spiraling out of control and government saying that there's, not much they can do about it.
Jeff, if you're a New Democrat and you're reading this, are you worried at all about the trend lines? Are you okay with where everything is at, or how do you take that away?
You're worried every morning about the trend lines, and you always wake up wanting to do better. I will say that the 48% approval is 10 points higher than what former Premier Clark polled at throughout her tenure. Premier Horgan's approval is right where it was when he took office. Doug Ford in Ontario was elected to a big majority with a lower approval rating than Premier Horgan. And if you look at Kevin Falcon's numbers in that poll, his negatives are really high, unusually high for someone who's just become the leader of a new party. And I think it would be, if I were the BC Liberals, I would be troubled looking at the horse race numbers still down by 11 points after the worst month of public opinion directed at the BC NDP since they took office.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thanks for the panel, Barinder and Mo, for jumping in this week. We'll be back next week with all the latest here on Political Capital.